follow someone like Catalina. It's very difficult, so just, stay with me here. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Everyday AI Dallas. I'm very excited to be here in person with all of you, helping to shape the future of kind of this brave new world we're in the era of Gen AI. So, as I said, I'm Christina. I work in product marketing at Dataiku, and I'm here to kind of take you from the vision that Catalina set and bring you down to the ground level of what contextual, what kind of components we're going to need from an architecture perspective to really bring that vision to life. And so in Catalina's talk, we had a great introduction to how at least one LLM-powered application, that agent, could work, taking a look inside of that sales chatbot, that analytics-generating chatbot. And we saw that LLM apps are a little bit different. We'll talk more about that right now from your traditional apps. And secondly, we saw that in order to stay ahead of the competition, you're going to need to create a lot of these across every, the full spectrum of your business. And so what we're going to talk about now is the conceptual architecture that you'll need to support all these different apps and do it safely and at scale. And let's actually begin with how LLM apps are a little different from all the apps we've developed in the past. And so I'd like to propose a 4-level framework. We have a data layer, a services layer, logic, and application at the top. So pretty basic. Now, at the beginning, we have, of course, our data. Unstructured data, structured data, these are things that have been our lifeblood forever. So this isn't new, but we do know that unstructured and textual data in particular has a larger role to play than ever before. Somewhat controversially, I'm going to put LLMs in the data layer also, and some of you may question this. The reason why we're putting it here is because if you've been following this space for a little while, you've heard people talk about billions of parameters, 7 billion, 40 billion, right? These are how we name the models. And these parameters are the numbers that govern the inner workings of these many layers of micro-calculations that happen inside these algorithms. They're just numbers, though. So if you think about Meta's Llama 3, latest family of models, we're talking terabytes worth of data. And if you guys are thinking about hosting your own open source LLMs, fine-tuning them, storing that data is going to be a thing. So let's put them in the data layer for right now. To use them in the modern way, we're going to need to expose them, usually as API services. So we're going to put LLM services into the next layer. We also have retrieval services. Now, these use some of the same large language model technologies, but for the purposes of information retrieval. So Catalina just mentioned retrieval augmented generation, or RAG techniques. You'll hear about that throughout today. That certainly has a place in the retrieval services bucket, but it's actually a bit larger than that. Then you add the traditional elements, data querying services. These are our SQL databases, and any number of arbitrary API services that you might call. Now, in the new world, where we talk about LLM agents, we really bucket those last two as tools, because that really is the logic of how the agent is going to use these services for its specific use case. So you can imagine an application where the agent has to look up the weather in real time, or dynamically check the traffic, or look up the stock market, or do a database query to your customer database before it can make the next best action recommendation. So we use these things as tools inside the agent, along with the prompts. Now, if you're not familiar with prompting, this is essentially the set of instructions that we give, and the context that we give to a model, an LLM, that tell it what you want it to do and how you want it to do it. And this is really generating a whole new market. You might have heard of this hot new job, prompt engineer. Okay, so these are people who are a brand new role that you want to hire for that skill set. And as we start to create hundreds or thousands of prompts, it becomes a new asset management issue. So how are we going to quality check them? How are we going to catalog them for reuse, templatize them? Who's going to govern them and maintain them over time? So prompting is going to be a big deal. It all comes together at agents. This is a new element in the IT ops landscape. It's a really important one, though, because it's really where the business and the reasoning logic of your app live. This is the brain of your app, and it governs what it can do, what it's allowed to do, and how it takes those magical steps behind the scenes. All of it's exposed through the application layer. This is what your end user sees. This is your user interface, your reporting capabilities, and so on. So if you look at the green and the blue coloring, you can see that there's a lot of common elements to all the data apps we've had in the past, but there's some new things on the scene as well. So throughout the years, there have been many different types of architecture paradigms that have existed, and a lot of it has to do with just the maturity of the internet. So where we started was this monolithic architecture where everything is contained in this huge block of code. And I always think of that meme you always see on the internet with Margaret Hamilton standing next to the stack of code that NASA wrote for the Apollo 11 launch. And it's like, that's the monolithic, huge block of code that contains everything from authenticating to your data, transforming it, displaying it, all of that wrapped into one big block. And over time, we realized, okay, we can do better. We can split it up. This is sort of unwieldy. It's hard to maintain. It's really complex. And we moved into a services-oriented architecture, or SOA. And we lived here for a long time throughout the development of the internet, where XML, web services started to break up that big code block. And now we sort of live in this microservices landscape. JSON, is being used as a vehicle to pass these things back and forth. All the services are hosted on Kubernetes. Everything's very atomic. And so when we think about where we are with traditional apps and where we are with LLM architecture, we're kind of like living in the monolithic stage right now. So, albeit it sounds a lot cooler because we call them chains, we're building like monolithic applications on LangChain. LangGraph is coming, but really these are just big standalone POCs that some people have managed to put into production. And this is a really great way to do it. So don't get me wrong. If you are trying to stand up a POC and see what the boundaries of possibility are, doing it in a self-contained way is a really great, fast way to prototype. But it doesn't scale well, and it's not going to be what the most successful companies are doing in 1 or 2 years. So if we think about what one application could look like, which we did this super simple, tiny little application, and then you think about what happens when the next team says, oh, well, I want an agent that's slightly different, uses maybe a different LLM under the scenes, but it uses maybe some of the same prompting. And then another team says, well, I want my own, and I have my own data. And you start to see how this quickly spiderwebs into a bit of a mess. And so it's not only ugly, but it's really difficult, and it's really risky to maintain something like this. So we have another XY for you. If you think about the number of LLM-powered apps that you can build on the left, on the x-axis, and the complexity of maintaining those, this is the classic technical debt diagram. Technical debt does not scale linearly, and as all those ugly intertwined connections get more and more complex, there comes a point at which every company cannot maintain any more complexity. Technical debt has now outpaced our ability to innovate. And our team spent all this time just troubleshooting and figuring out how to unplug one thing without taking the whole system down. So the only way that we can build more apps to go higher up on that value curve, to be the Netflix and not the Blockbuster, is to raise the ceiling. We have to be able to make things less complex. And that's where we start to break apart that monolith, and we start to modularize into more of a services-oriented architecture. So the new architectural paradigm that I'm going to propose is called an LLM Mesh, and it really has 3 main principles. First is it abstracts the application layer away from the services layer. And this standardizes the interface so that every time you want to unplug an LLM or a retriever or any other service underneath the hood, you don't have to change the top, the front end. So this is really important, and it also standardizes the complexity of connecting to different models. Azure OpenAI takes a different, format for its API than GPT does, which takes a different format from Gemini and Anthropic. And so how can you not deal with all that all the time? That's what this application layer is about. Second, federated services for control and analysis. So there are certain things that every app has to care about. Cost monitoring, security, monitoring data privacy, monitoring for toxic content, prompt injection, things like that. Quality and evaluation metrics, those are all standards, so we need to be able to apply those unilaterally to every app. Third is about good housekeeping and hygiene. And this is probably the hardest one because this is where people tend to be the problem. How many of you really love documentation and cataloging, right? It's like nobody likes it. But an LLM Mesh provides centralized discovery and documentation for all of those components, as well as for the apps themselves, so that your end user, when you see that slide that Catalina showed with 25 boxes, they even know which URL to hit for the right agent. That's in and of itself a problem. So AI builders are going to need clean catalogs to do their jobs. AI end users are going to need to know which app to even go to do the job they want to do faster. And the automated agents themselves also need kind of a clean way of getting the right tool that they want. So taken together, this is really our vision for how you go from that LLM mess I showed before to the LLM Mesh, is first you establish your catalog and your gateway. And this is kind of the heavy lift to begin with, because you do a lot of documentation. You have to figure out your own company's policies for what approved LLMs are able to be used for certain use cases based on data privacy issues, for example. So everything needs to be registered, approved, documented, ready for use. Then you create your federated services. What security and access controls do we have in place? What kind of content moderation, guardrails do we have? Cost monitoring, budgeting constraints, performance. How are we going to benchmark what good even looks like without just looking at 10 records and being like, that seems pretty good. Like, that's not so great at scale. Then your teams can go on, they can build these apps. You can build this yourself. And Catalina showed that column on the left. You can definitely build this yourself. If you have the right people with the right know-how, and this is a corporate priority, this is not something that we have the market on. It is really hard, though, if that's not your core business. So, what does Dataiku have to do with the LLM Mesh? Well, it's something we've been thinking about a lot. We come up with the idea a couple years ago, and the guy who kind of had the idea for this talk is literally writing the book on the topic. I am not, unfortunately, writing the book. I am helping edit the book, which is much less interesting. But I do encourage you to hit this QR code, read the first chapter. We're going to be dripping chapters of this before the entire tech guide is available in the beginning of next year. And it's a really well written, it's a fast read, it's not too technical on how to really approach these new challenges that we have. So go there to learn more. And then, of course, this is not a surprise, you all are here. We are a software company, so of course we have the LLM Mesh inside our product. And I'll talk about that at 3 o'clock during our product session. I'm going to go into all these components on this slide, as well as what's coming on the roadmap for everything else. But the short of it is the LLM Mesh with Dataiku is really the cornerstone of our current and future product development, because we think this is going to be the differentiator that's going to help you not just survive, but also thrive in the new normal. And it's already embedded and integrated with all the capabilities you already know and love from Dataiku today. So you can start slowly interweaving Gen AI into your ETL pipelines, into your ML models, into your analytics dashboards without having to break stride, without having to buy new tools, without having to onboard an entirely new set of people on a new skill set. So this is really exciting stuff for us today. I look forward to speaking with you more about the product in a couple hours and throughout the break as well. So I'm going to introduce Chris Helmus, who's going to have our first customer panel now. So thank you so much for your time.